excerpts from the Cutler Almanac on the Prime Timeline detailing the Ministry's first contact with an alternate ministry. (2267) and Victor Ecclesiaberg was dead. But was it from natural causes or an accident? According to the Ministry of Truth, the answer is both, at the same time. As a spokesperson put it, Ecclesiaberg suffered an overdose of bad luck. In the same year, the Ministry of Defence, under the leadership of Admiral Bob Takeda, formalised official usage of the Third Fleet by promoting an admiral to lead it. Originally planned to be a provisional fleet for new personnel to be trained on, an unexpected attack by a spacefaring crystalline organism in the Sim system caused this training fleet to undergo quick reorganisation into a patrol fleet to deal with this and other potential future threats. Bob Takeda, Councillor for Defence, leader of the Ministry of Defence, outlined his hard stance on drugs in the following year. Drugs were wrong, he said, and no life form should ever be forced or even allowed to take them. Despite being informed that medicines were drugs and some life forms, mainly the Blom, needed exotic gases to survive, he remained steadfast in his position of shutting down all drugs. Sheesh, someone needs to take a chill pill. In 2269, experiments began to genetically alter non-humans to produce non-human terrors. Over the course of the following 4 years, 98.72% of the experiments passed away, either before introduction of the terror gene or soon after. Of the surviving experimental cases, only 2 developed dimension-hopping abilities. It was discovered that humans, at least in the Prime Timeline, were not xenocompatible. The news didn't stop xenophilic Dave from indulging in his own private experiments, the dirty bugger. In an unrelated event, the ever-present Blom generously provided a solution to the growing hunger crisis by supplying their gracious protectors, the Ministry, with their latest innovation in snacks. Midnight Munchies got you down, fear not, have a Blom brownie, trademark. The bestest, snackiest of snacks. The introduction of the Blom brownie marked the start of a drastic crash in worker efficiency and a general slump in production rates, which was oddly mirrored by a massive spike in worker happiness and an increase in exotic gases production. Yes, that was a fart joke. Later in the year, after the Ministry forces raided what was apparently the Codronite cartel's last branch office in the Ministry, Bob Takeda declared that the war on crime had been won. "We did it, boys. We beat crime and corruption." Although the lawyers were adamant that the word allegedly be added, damned pessimists. After all, the thousands of Codronites legally committing crime on a mere handful of worlds could easily be ignored. It took less than a year before Bob Takeda christened his new mega yacht Victory. That's in all caps and with an exclamation mark at the end, for those not listening with their eyes. And if you're not, why not subscribe to the next tier of my Patreon for better access to Ministry resources? As for the yacht, when asked about his new purchase, Mr. Takeda said he had been saving his pocket money for quite some time, and that he had simply been holding off buying it until crime had been beaten, which it definitely had, by the way. Otherwise, he simply would not be able to relax in any of the yacht's 3 indoor heated pools, all with integrated bars. Some sources close to Mr. Takeda said that he had never expressed interest in buying a yacht, which just goes to show that this man knew how to keep a secret. How else would he have beaten crime? That fully explains how the leader of the Ministry of Defence took up a very lavish lifestyle after beating crime, and is not the least bit suspicious. In 2273, the Ministry of Timelines proposed new contracts to the Codronites, Blom, and Belboss. The contracts included new taxes for the 3 alien civilizations. Protection doesn't come cheap after all but the hegemony sign on the dotted line without delay. When Ministry officials visited the Codronites in 2275 to discuss the ongoing crime problems on the planet Spring, they encountered a nervous lady who claimed to be part of a sub-ministry bureau asking the Codronites to fill out some forms. She seemed very impressed to meet Bob Takeda, the current Minister for Defense. 2 years later, fringe and rebel groups, dissatisfied with ministry control, stole a large number of civilian ships. They immediately retrofitted the ships with weapons, and calling themselves the Screaming Marauders, the fleet travelled to Intham, raiding supply lines and resource extractors, the little scamps. The ministry began blockading Hegemony of Belbos trade routes in 2280, an attempt to get them to sign a new treaty which would force the Hegemony to finally pay their taxes. The Hegemony said no. They just don't know what's good for them. At the start of 2283, the Chief Counselor agreed to the demands of his Minister of Defense and further hardened the sanctions on the Empire of Belbos. The Empire's capital was placed under blockade, in the hopes of fulfilling their demands for more resources. The lethargic Minister of Defense did not find the large fleets in Belbos' home system worrying, but instead declared that the Ministry's fleets would in fact be sufficient. Igaria, capital of the Belbos, was legally blockaded, and it was unclear whether the situation would escalate further. A month later, a growing number of the Codronite populace became increasingly frustrated at the Ministry of Timelines for the tariffs on basic goods, food in particular. They resented the taxation despite their lack of representation in the Ministry of Timelines. The ministry's continued tariffs resulted in a cost of living crisis on many Codronite habitats. A Codronite extremist group, the Codronite People's Opposition, or K-pop, decided to take matters into their own hands. This came to a head when Bob Takeda, the Minister of Defense of the Ministry of Timelines, decided to give the mineral purification plant on Spring a surprise inspection. It was a combined visit to ensure that the planet's mineral production was up to snuff and ready to be converted into alloys, and also to accept bribes for overlooking the employees' safety concerns there. The most notable concern made by many employees was the lack of security in the plant, despite being in the middle of a crime-ridden area, and how anyone could just walk in with a fully loaded bomb or something. Laughing at what he thought was a rather sensationalist example, Bob Takeda was in the middle of taking a security bribe when a K-pop member did just that, and walked into the plant carrying a fully loaded bomb. The bombing resulted in the death of the great leader, Bob Takeda, as well as hundreds of other casualties, and was a major blow to the mineral production capabilities of Spring. An autocathon monument was built to honour Bob Takeda, and I guess loads of the other unnamed NPCs. Halfway through 2283, Eleanor DeVille, the alleged ministry agent from a sub-ministry bureau, was in the middle of a conversation with Emperor Elmo of the Hegemony of Belbos when the Emperor suddenly collapsed and died. Some claimed this to be an assassination, but the cause of death was then determined to be the emotional strain caused by the Emperor's personal servant James, when he brought Eleanor the striped kneeling pillow and not the polka-dotted one. Doctors were unable to help, as the decor faux pas, perhaps combined with the potent poison in his drink, proved to be the death of the Emperor. Communications divisions for both empires assured the press the death was entirely coincidental and not related to the blockade heading for the capital system. Emperor Goom was crowned immediately, and Eleanor's questioning resumed. The following year, when reviewing tactical overviews of available fleets for the blockade, the new Minister of Defense saw on their screen the Bubbles fleet tagged as in need of replenishment. The minister was overcome by a deep sense of sadness at realizing their predecessor had been unable to bring themselves to remove the fleet from their active records. Several assistants, however, reminded them while hovering their finger over the delete button of the many tears shed, and they were ultimately unable to go through with it. In response, a large-scale ad campaign was launched, entitled Bubbles, a Very Good Girl. It showed her tragic death while heroically attempting to deliver a pen to end previous hostilities. Some described the campaign as callously calculated to drum up support for the blockade, but were promptly booed into silence by an outraged public, and the ministry decreed that the embargo would be extended. The capital of Belbos would not see another pen until they agreed to reparations, which is, I guess, what they were now calling those new taxes. In 2285, the new Minister of Defense, Feng He, accidentally crossed paths with Eleanor de Vil while she was talking with Emperor Goom on Igaria, the Belboss capital. The interaction was brief and left the Ministry of Timelines completely unaware of the powerful ally the Emperor of Belboss had just made. While on a diplomatic mission to get Emperor Goom to sign the paperwork, Feng He supplanted the Chief Counselor and was then elected to the highest position of power in the Ministry. He immediately got up off the floor that he was kneeling on, done with bowing to the Emperor, and demanded that the Emperor sign or the Ministry would double down on the blockade. And when I say he got up off the floor, I mean of course that Feng He got up off the floor, and it was he, that is Feng He, who demanded that he, the Emperor, not Feng He, sign the paperwork. This would not need clarifying if you had the correct access and were at the appropriate support level, and of course were listening with your eyes. In 2291, tired of inaction, Feng He, Chief Counselor of the Ministry of Timelines, decided to drop troops on Hegemony worlds. 2 mega warforms and several regiments of human soldiers landed on Igaria, capital of Belboss, amongst the standoff over trade agreements and taxes. Feng He continued to insist that it was not, in fact, martial law, but a peacekeeping mission to protect Codronite interests on the world. Codronite branch offices had been given legal approval by the Ministry to set up their crime cabals in Belboss territory to put further pressure on the Emperor. The next year, the Ministry of Timelines noticed unrecognized quantum and temporal signatures and started to investigate them. A year on, they tracked down a person who they believed to be tied to this anomaly, to a noodle shop in New Alexandria. However, before they could be captured, the mystery person took a step to the left and disappeared. The Ministry of Timelines was not inclined to think this was a result of some sort of chronal displacement, as there were no knees brought in tight. In 2292, a salvaged fleet assembled by the Blom conducting interdiction operations against the Belboss in the Hemtari system on behalf of the Ministry of Timelines was contaminated by the fearsome Javorian pox, a plague that has devastated many other timelines. The Blom's Shout Out to Help Out campaign may have come too early. In 2293, the vile hegemony of Belboss continued to ignore the reason, the common sense, and the other high-caliber negotiation devices the Ministry of Timelines were able to utilize. As a result, the Ministry of Timelines instead used special measures and placed the Belboss leadership under arrest. Despite this, the peacekeeping operation still did not put enough pressure on the Belboss, and the Ministry of Timelines soldiers extended the operation to arrest all rulers and politicians. The only exception was the Emperor of the Hegemony, who was placed under house arrest. When told that the entire ruling class had been arrested for being unable to be reasoned with, the Emperor merely said, "That's fair." The arrests, despite the intention behind them, caused only minor havoc, as all the bureaucrats were quietly left to their work without someone watching over their shoulders. Productivity fell by only 5%, even with the loss of millions of people. In the following year, the Ministry threatened a coup d'etat. Not wanting to be removed from power and replaced with a new emperor that would agree to the treaty, the Emperor finally saw sense and signed the paperwork. The Ministry then ended their occupation and legal landing of troops. The Codronite crime syndicate, however, decided not to leave. Eleanor de Vil went to have a chat with the High Council of the Ministry of Timelines later in 2293 and gave them a question form to fill in. The council was oblivious to the foreign terror that came into their midst. Even though they were searching for terrors from elsewhere, the fact that Eleanor was exactly who they were searching for went unnoticed. They even remained oblivious enough to discuss plans to infiltrate another timeline, Eleanor's timeline, while she was present, much to Eleanor's delight. Heading into 2300, the Ministry of Timelines set up an observation mission to the Foreign Terrors timeline. It was codenamed the Prawn Timeline, mostly because within that timeline they seemed to find an alternate version of their own ministry only ruled by alien prawns. Observation reports also noted that the Prawn Ministry prayed to some weird deities among lots of other weird stuff going on over there. The entirely sensibly named Earl Hubert Wafflebottom from the Ministry of Timelines arrived to Eleanor's ministry headquarters in 2305 to deliver a questionnaire to them. Funnily enough, it was the same questionnaire that Eleanor had previously delivered. While the interaction went smoothly, after Earl Wafflebottom left, Eleanor was heard to remark, "I'm pretty sure that was one of their agents. God, those people are idiots." I mean, she's not wrong. In 2308, after nearly a century of promises that the Ministry of Timelines would deal with the rogue dreadnought in the Rygonath system, dozens of cruisers jumped into the system and disabled it. Although, many Belboss ships who joined the fight were tragically lost. Ministry of Timelines engineers began to draw up plans to repurpose the dreadnought for Ministry use. Swordfish Cove was sacked in the same year by a massive fleet of raiding ships with identical quantum signatures to the terrors observed from another timeline, the other ministry. This was clearly the first attack from one ministry's timeline into another. The raiding party attacked while the ministry fleets were busy dealing with that automated dreadnought. In 2310, after 46 years of worthy service, senior adjunct to the council Kayan Patil, previously chief counsellor, vanished without a trace. He was last seen among the vaults of knowledge. It was possible that he was unable to return from a normal expedition to another timeline, but some suspected that the other terrors were to blame. Please refer to the next chapter for further excerpts from the Cutler Almanac on the Prime Timeline.